Well, welcome to another edition of Walk With Me Online, where we get to talk to the leaders in sports, business and entertainment. And it's not often that, I get to sit down with a lot of great people in sports and business. And this man was no exception with the great rivalry that the North Melbourne Footy Club had with the Essendon Football Club. His record is one of the best going round, and premiership player, multiple best and fairest. And he did actually, you did win this particular award that you and I have probably not spoken about this publicly.
No.
There was this particular award, I think, that someone got suspended. Now, what were you blokes thinking on that particular night when I'm sitting at home in my tracky dacks and you guys are swanning around Crown Casino getting your medals?
Yeah, well, look, I think the three of us should have won it. Vossi, myself and yourself. You should have a Brownlow medal hanging around your neck, because from memory, the incident wasn't much either. That you got suspended for. But, it was, I suppose, a heartbreaking night for you that night. But, 5 or 6 days later, when you won the 1996 grand final, I think we all would have traded places with you for sure to be there and win that grand final. And I think Brisbane was beaten by you guys in preliminary final, and Sydney beat up in preliminary final. So Vossi and I were licking our wounds, very happy to win the Brownlow, but I can promise you I would have changed places with any day of the week.
Speaking of changing things, would you have your time over again? You'd not wear that tartan vest that you had on?
Well, you'd think that, wouldn't you? You would think that, but it does give my kids great pleasure to see that photo, and they know where the vest is. They bring it out now and then. So it's although it's an embarrassing moment, if not for no other reason, I'm remembered in 100 years for my tartan vest, and I'll be very proud of it.
Yeah, you and Graham Teasdale, you're in the Brownlow Hall of Fame for wearing things to the Brownlow.
Oh, his suit, he had a brown suit, didn't he? Wasn't that his?
He had a brown, I think a velvet suit. I think he
velvet suit. No, it's up there. It's right up there. But you make mistakes in your younger days, don't you? So
now, knowing you're very similar, I think, to Wayne Carey in terms of mindset and the way that you're going about it. But all the individual awards aside, I do remember that stuck in my mind, that you did say that straight away, that, you can have all those individual awards, but at the end of the day, the thing that really drove you, and I know that drove Wayne, was really getting your hands on that silverware. Yeah,
look, the Brownlow was wonderful to win, and I wouldn't give it back or say it wasn't an achievement I'm very proud of, but that we played for so long, and, you won 2 premierships, I won 2 premierships, and we're very grateful to have won those. But we always wanted more and more and more, and it was all about achieving the ultimate, which is getting to a grand final and winning it. And I think the individual awards you look at and you say fantastic, but even to today, the Brownlow is great. Look back on it, but there's not one day I think about the Brownlow. Whereas the premierships, every now and then you're just walking down the street, something will pass through your head. You'll talk to a premiership teammate. You'll have a vision. So that was the best part of my career, playing in those 2 premierships. But it was also just the culmination of the hard work with your teammates. I mean, as you would know, every day slogging away, weights, team meetings, running drills, training, injuries, all for that one purpose.
And just give everyone an insight again, because I'm very fortunate that I obviously, played with Wayne Carey, and I think the parallels between the pair of you, how you went about it. But give everyone an insight, because I also know that either I'd be around the tan and you'd be there doing your extra running sessions, all these things. Just give everyone an insight into how much extra it would take to be James Hird, because it's the one thing I say about even, and again, I know I'm mentioning Wayne and you're in that same category, it's about all those extras that you guys do that no one else would see.
Well, firstly, thank you for comparing to Wayne Carey, because he's the greatest player that I ever saw, and still think the greatest player to have played. So, and he's certainly in a different level. But to me, the training at the football club for 2-3 hours a day, or whatever it was only the start. That was the start. That was the team-based training, I suppose the strategy-based training, the getting to know your teammates. But every day there was much more than that. Whether it be extra recovery sessions when you were sore and hurt, but a lot of what I was never a physical animal. I didn't have the physical power or I suppose the capabilities of the carer, even yourself. You know, you'd run into you and you'd sort of spend the next week recovering. You know, these big mountains of men. So the two things that I really prided myself on, I had to get fitter and aerobically fitter than anybody else, anaerobically fitter, and be able to repeat effort runs playing the position I played. But the most important thing to me was my touch. I wasn't fast. I wasn't as strong as a lot. I was okay, but never the strongest. I had to be the cleanest player there was. And so I just worked hour after hour, throwing balls against walls, kicking them to myself, throwing them against trees, down in parks, to make sure that my touch was one touch straight away. And I think that probably that was one thing I was able to get away with, not being as strong or physically powerful as a lot of the players that I played against. You know, I'd come up against your great mate Mick Martin. I'd come up against Stephen Silvani. I'd come up against these, you know, physically powerful men that I had to find another way to compete with.
And is that one of the things now that you've obviously got the boys that in and around and involved at the Bombers? Is that the one thing that you're probably trying to impress on them, that you're not going to? You don't strike me as being the Demir Dokic that you're going to be in their lives and being overbearing. But if you can give them that subtle advice about doing the extra work, and I mean, yes, you can do all the training like you mentioned, but is that the words of advice you'd have for your boys going on to Essendon now?
You'd be surprised. There's an element of Demir Dokic in every father, I think. So it does come out now and then, but and definitely as I've matured, or as I got older, I'm less Demir Dokic like. But our daughter, who's the eldest, Steph's 22, she would probably attest that I was a bit more like that. But the thing for me with the boys and with any kid is that there's two things that I think you always got to have. You got to love what you do. Like, I think it's very hard not to love the sport if you're at elite level and do the amount of training you do. If you don't have that love and passion, I don't think many players or people are going to get to where they want to get to. And secondly, you know, work rate, work ethic, love something, try and learn all the time. It can account for maybe less talent if you've got that work ethic. So for any of my children, it's not just football, it's everything. It's sort of try and find something you really enjoy in it and then work your backside off. Give it everything you have and don't leave any, you know, Dennis Paganism, don't leave any stone unturned, because if you do it, you can account for some lack of talent that may be along the way. So, yeah, if it's Tom at Essendon or Steph, whatever, or the other kids, it's really about love it, work as hard as you can, and listen and learn. Because a lot of players that I was around, or the ones that could have been better and didn't when I coached, particularly, they just didn't listen enough. Listen enough to not just me, but the people around the club, the people who've been there and done that. Because you can take a few shortcuts if you listen to the experienced people around the traps. And
look, some of the injuries that you ended up having, like, there weren't just little niggles. Like the one I do distinctly remember, the one with was it the stress fracture with your foot? Was there a stage that you thought, I might not come back? Because I remember being in and around that time, and there was even whispers going around that say, hey, he might not be back playing.
Yeah, I think the third time I did the same injury in my foot to a stress fracture in the navicular. The third one really, I suppose, crushed me in terms of mentally. I remember sitting. I think it was against you guys actually. It was a Thursday night before Good Friday. We played North Melbourne. I know it was round 2, 1999, and I just couldn't keep going. Like I knew I was sore going into the game. And I came off just half through the third quarter, I think, and thought then for the first time the career was a chance it could be done. And I was listening to the radio on Good Friday, and commentators, like every commentator expert, and they'll never play again. They had all the doctors, all the experts that he won't play, and that puts a seed of doubt in your mind. But a few days into that, I had the operation, and then sat down. A few days after the operation, really sat down and thinking, I really want to have one more crack at it. And if I don't make it back, then that's the way that my career will go. But fortunately, good medical staff. And the one thing in my mind, I always had in my mind when I had an injury, was I'm going to come back a better player after this injury than I was before the injury. and I know that can sound silly and a bit, too high level, but that gives you the motivation through the injury to keep training and getting better. You need something. When you've got long-term injuries, you need something to keep coming back to. And my view was, I'm going to be better at the end of this injury than I was at the start. And that got me through. Unfortunately, I was able to play another 7 or 8 years and win another premiership after that. So it was defining, but I think it can define you in two ways: make you go down or make you go up.
And then one thing I'm sort of curious about, like we all know what such a great rivalry the North Melbourne Essendon rivalry like during that time. Like they were bitter rivals, but there was utmost respect between both the clubs. What was the one thing that when you looked at North Melbourne? Because I know there might have been. I did hear a story that was it either you or Matthew Lloyd wanted to catch up with Duck to find out why we were all so close and how we're able to have that culture at North Melbourne. Was that true?
It may have been Lloydie. It wasn't me. It may have been, but I think it started with Dennis, because Dennis was obviously your under-19s coach.
Yeah,
came to coach us in Essendon in the reserves in 1993 or 1992. Sorry, 1992. He came to coach us in the reserves. And Dennis, as you know, is a hard man, but a great coach. He motivated, inspired. We won that reserves premiership, and then he left. And I think, he knew a lot of us as players. You guys started to come up, and formed a really strong team. And to be honest, you beat the crap out of us year after year after year. I mean, the amount of times, I'd walk away from Mick Martin, have a handful of my hair in his hand, or Glenn Archer, would have Lloydie down on the ground with a choker hold. And not only did you beat us on the scoreboard, but you intimidated us. And I think it was 99. We hadn't beaten you for years. And 99, at the start of 99, we just said, okay, whatever happens, we just got to show, we've got to come out and play against North Melbourne and actually put up a physical force. And it was probably the middle of the year. It was the game that I think Duck kicked 11 or 12 and Lloydie kicked 10, and we actually beat you for the first time. But as much as the scoreboard, I think we stood up. We stood up. And then for 3 or 4 years, we were able to stand up against you. And it was built out of respect, total respect for the quality of footballers you were, but the quality of, teammates, how close you were. And I think your greatest rivalries make you better. And you guys certainly made us better because we wanted to beat you. And that, we had amazing rivals with Carlton, with Hawthorn, but in that era, those North Melbourne games with the pinnacle. I even remember 2000 night grand final. Who really cares about a night grand final? But that was as tough a game as I think I've played in my life, because it was, it was Glenn Archer, yourself, Duck, Mickey Martin, all trying to, Anthony Stevens, all trying to knock our heads off, and we had to come back the other way. So it was what you play footy for, really.
Now, can we set the record straight, Erdy? Because it was not any of the players that come up with that bullshit about the marshmallows. Was that just classic Sheeds trying to get all the fires going about, it was Mark Dawson and Greg Miller or something? And because that it was not coming from none of the players at North Melbourne.
I think what you got to understand is when you're coached by Sheeds, the outside world thinks that we're all in on these game plans and these jokes and these things, but we had as little idea as you do what he was talking about. Pink marshmallow, white marshmallow, he'd say these things and we'd all just, it's another Sheeds thing. So we turn up the game, not really knowing what he said, not knowing that he's fired you blokes up. And I think halfway through the last quarter, when we're all getting white marshmallows and pink marshmallows thrown at us in the crowd, we're like, what's Sheeds done? But in credit to him, Dennis and he had that rivalry that spilled over into us as players. And, it created a certain level and atmosphere and games that perhaps, were as much theatre as they were football. And they were great to be a part of. So I think, Dennis underplays how much of a showman he is, but he contributed to that as well. I think they bounced off each other. But Sheeds, when he when he thinks that he's got a rival that he wants to create something with, he certainly can turn it up, and he did on that occasion.
And it was, you did have to laugh at the funny side of it when Sheeds had to walk down on the boundary line after the game and all the pink and white marshmallows raining down on the MCG was actually pretty funny. So I think Mick Martin was walking along picking them up and eating at the same time. So, but look, Hurdy, I suppose when I was sort of doing the research for this, and then when I think of the immense pressure that I think you're a lifelong Essendon fan, you played, won premierships there, ended up coaching the footy club, and then everything that was going on with what happened. It's, when you look back at it now, is it any wonder when you think, hang on, no wonder I got to breaking point? Because how are you now in terms of reconciling going through all that and the immense spotlight that you were under at that time?
Yeah, where I am now in my life, and you look back and you go, gee, that was how'd you get through that? How intense was it? And, a lot of support from some amazing people. But I think when you make mistakes like we made at the Essendon Footy Club, and big mistakes and public mistakes, and the pressure comes on, rightly so. You've got to find a way of coping, and you cope with support from your family, with support from your wife, with support from friends. But in the end, you can only cope for so long. And and I did melt down. Ended up in a psychiatric ward for 5 weeks, and really didn't handle that pressure well. But fortunately, with the help of people around me, I was able to come through that and be where I am today. So it was definitely a life experience, not one I would want to go through again or encourage anyone to go through. But it's and you hurt a lot of people through that. You hurt a lot of people, and I think that's part of you realise what the effect you've had on people, and then a lot of people were hurt. I think that probably makes you more vulnerable because you never set out to hurt anybody. So the tough time, but as low as it gets, I think you've just got to find a way, and people around you find a way to help you through that. And fortunately, I was able to get through. And
with the types of injuries you'd had in football, were you able to learn from those experiences previously of your stress fracture in your foot, and then obviously the injury that you got in Perth? Was it a little bit the same? Now I know it's to do with your mental health in this particular case. Once you got to a certain point, were you able to, like what you used to do, where you say, right, I'm actually going to set myself a little mini target or a goal or a structure or a routine that I know that I can actually get through this?
Look, perhaps it may have helped, but it was just so different. Like it was so different because I think, when you injure yourself, there's really not a lot of fault of your own, right? It just happens and whatever. But I think one of the greatest things that can really get you to doubt yourself is when you make mistakes that perhaps you could have prevented, and there's a lot of blame on yourself. And I think that's when you really start to go, okay, that's when things are tough. And I think you affect and you hurt other people, or other people get hurt, or the footy club gets hurt by things that you could have done better. And that was and then you get the pressure of it being quite public. That was a lot harder than any injury. And maybe there's a bit of resilience learnt through football, but the resilience I got through that period, is a lot more than through any footy game or any footy injury.
Was it also, I think, a big part of, were you probably wrestling within your head to go, well, hang on, it's no different. I give the Wayne Carey example as well. It's like, hang on, I'm meant to be James Hird here. I'm meant to be able to, get through this and find a way through. Was that also a bit of the case where you're beating yourself up to go, hang on, I'm used to finding solutions. I'm used to doing anything.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. You're used to finding a solution, and there wasn't a solution, or there wasn't an easy solution. There was only tough decisions that had to be made, and not being able to deal with how to handle that. Yeah, I think that's as tough as anything. When you know you've failed, like that's a failure is is hard to deal with, particularly people like you and myself in our careers, where you haven't failed very often, or if you failed, it's been a minor fail. Whereas this is a major fail. I think that's very hard to deal with.
And then, so how are you in terms of where you are from a headspace now? I suppose reconciling the fact that in one aspect you had a glittering career and you had always on the up and up and up, but then you have like this one big one. How are you from a mindset and reconciling all that now that you're in a much, much better headspace?
I'm really good. I mean, at some stage you've got to say I've failed, but do you want to keep failing by keep going back to that failure? And I think that's the point. You go, okay, here's the fail. How do I move on from the fail and try and rebuild and try and regain respect? And it's respect of other people, but it's respect of yourself as importantly as ever, because you lose a lot of respect for yourself along a journey like that. But then you gain a lot of respect for yourself as you build out of it as well, because you know that you've gone to a very low spot and there's choices not to come back. So, I get a lot of confidence, self-confidence out of what I've done the last 3 or 4 years, business-wise and personally. And it gives you a different sort of confidence than perhaps football gave you, and maybe a deeper, more sincere form of confidence than the football careers gave us. That I suppose gave us this bravado and this confidence that we could do anything. But what happened coming through that, I think it builds a deeper level of confidence.
And what would be some of the things, Hurdy, that you have been able to implement yourself that, like, I'm really big on when we talk about doing Walk With Me online, about whether it's habits or structures or routines. What have you been, like, what's the thing that, I suppose, for advice for people out there that if they've got themselves into a bit of a bind or whatever, what were the things that worked really well for you?
I think it's a really good point, Corey, because, coming from the world we came from, which was football, which is quite structured and quite rigid, I didn't realise how much I'd missed that structure and rigidity of either being in a football environment as a player or as a coach. So when you come out of that and you've got none of that, and once I left football, I didn't really have a job. So I really, you've lost your personal identity, you've lost your job. What gets you out of bed? Where's that structure come from? So for me, and talk about that confidence and understanding exactly what I need around my life and structure, and became really important. And you wouldn't be surprised to understand it's quite simple things. Exercise is super important for me, and doing it first thing in the morning. So I'm up at 4 or 5 in the morning on a business in America, but before I do, I make sure I get in some sort of hour of exercise just to get my head straight. And if I don't do that, I know the day is going to be it won't be as successful or as good as it normally is. And that's not right for everyone, right? But having that commitment to do that on a day-to-day basis is something that I don't let go, ever. Making sure that there are tasks through the day that I need to complete, so it's not just a wandering day, but there's certain things stuck in is really important. Eating really well, so eating really, really well during the week, and no alcohol during the week either. I know that sounds very simple, but you get to the point where every night you're drinking, this sort of thing, and I just said no. During the week, it's just not going to happen. So they're the basic things. There goes the doorbell. But I suppose that's basically what gives me the flat line or the base.
Yeah.
And then when to try and achieve more and to try and get better, then it's about interesting tasks, interesting people, making sure that you're continually having something that stimulates you in your business life to try and stretch yourself even further. So I call it this baseline I have to complete every day. And then if I want to try and get better at something, then it's about going and finding new and interesting people to get ideas from.
And so you'd always been really good at that. Looking at you from the outside, you'd always seemed like to me that you had that balance outside of footy really well. Like, I know even Sheed's a joke about it that, you go to uni and it wasn't as if you were like him, where he's the the plumber from South Yarra, but you'd always really had that. You seemed like you had that balance really well down pat when even when you're playing footy.
Yeah, I suppose I did when I was playing footy because the football was there and it was all quite structured and rigid. But when that football side of things left and when I didn't have a job, it was pretty much, well, there isn't that structure. There isn't that side of things. And I didn't really know how to get back into that. Like I had to work very hard and take on some pretty basic jobs and tasks to try and get back into a rhythm. So it's certainly taken a while, but some people don't need that structure or rigidity. I just knew that I really needed that, and that was sort of missing for a couple of years.
Yeah. Now, look, Herdy, it's been awesome to sit down with you like this. So when I come to Melbourne, I reckon we need to maybe not do it during the week where we can have a glass of red wine and sit down and talk about all these stories, because I've actually loved doing this today. But one question I always ask to everyone is the fork in the road moment where it could have, where things could have gone either way for James Hird. What was the one where for you that sticks in your mind about your fork in the road moment?
Well, there's been a couple. Where I chose the wrong fork. When I chose to go coaching in 2010, that might have been a fork that I could have avoided. But to me, it was, it was back in, a few years ago. Am I going to get back into life, or am I just going to hide from it? And that was the fork in the road. And I don't think it was one exact moment, but there was probably a period of 2 or 3 months there, middle of 2017, somewhere around that period where I was hiding from life and not really contributing. And am I going to have a crack back into it and try and live my life again, or just hide away? And that was sort of over a period of time. But I'm glad I chose the decision to get back into life, because it's bloody good and it's good fun when it's not always great, but when you get it right, there's a lot of really good things to look forward to.
Yeah. Well, look, mate, like I said, it's been fantastic to sit down and just pick your brain about, and there's so many gems that come out of today. I know people are going to get a lot out of it in terms of really big with Walk With Me Online. How can we give more people tools in their kit bag about thriving in any environment? And a lot of your words of advice is, for someone like yourself that went through some tough times, it's great advice for anyone. So, look, on behalf of everyone, a big thank you, mate. And then when I come to Melbourne, I think we might crack open a bottle of red, and then we can share old stories and hang shit on Mick Martin and Wayne Carey and all the people that we played against. So
I'll hang shit on you. I'll hang shit on Wayne Carey, but there's no way I'm going to hang shit on Mick Martin. He still terrifies me when I go to sleep. So he got me in a choker hole one day in the goal square to the MCG, and I'm sure I saw stars. He was a scary man, Mick. But we always love the times against North Melbourne, and particularly yourself, mate. You're a superstar, and thank you for having me on Walk With Me.
No, thank you, mate. Hugely appreciated. And to everyone out there, to check out this episode and all the other ones, go to Walk With Me Online, and you can see this and many other interviews. Even old buffhead Wayne Carey's on there too. So big thanks to everyone. Big thanks to Herdy, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Corey.